Good day, everybody. We're here again. It's Atlantic Discuss. Yes, every Friday we come to you with something that reverberates with mankind, strategic and important. And yes, a lot of you have been asking me, where's David Hundeyin? We will bring David back. Yes, David is back. He's here with us again. So in our tradition, we don't like to waste time too much. David is not a stranger to us, so David is here. David, welcome once again to Atlantic Discuss.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, David is here. So, David, let's just go for the jugular. So, what's your take on the current state of global politics, particularly regard to the rise of nationalist movements and the increasing tensions between global powers? What's your take on all this? I'm sure it's a hydra-headed one, so take your time on that. Yeah.
It's a set of developments which I guess have been coming for a while.
Mm,
I guess it's been no secret that there's been a sort of rightward drift,
mm,
at least in the Western world,
mm,
a drift away from globalization towards sort of natalism and nationalism in some cases. So I guess what many have underestimated is the speed with which this shift was eventually going to reach its, the extent that it has got to now, and the sheer disillusionment that I guess most of, well, let me not say most, but a large fraction of the population of that part of the world had with the existing social and political order, which made them turn to alternatives that they've never turned to before. So now
mm,
we're seeing developments that we've never really seen before,
mm,
right? So in the US, for example, where I mean we've seen Trump before, what we haven't seen before is a US president and a US administration who are so, openly and actively anti-globalist and
mm,
anti-imperialist, so to speak.
mm,
So I would, if you had told me 6 months ago that I'd be referring to a US administration as anti-imperialist, I would have thought that's not possible. Like this, it's bound up with the very nature of what it is to be a US government. But we're seeing a US government that is in the we're looking at it in the act of retreating from the world, so to speak. Well, retreat is not the correct word. We're seeing a US administration that is sort of downsizing the role that it has assigned itself to play in the world, which, I mean, from an African perspective, it's a wonderful thing. But part of me also can't help thinking, when is the other shoe going to drop? Where's the catch? Like in exchange for all these developments, which I'm absolutely ecstatic about, what are they going to take in return? That's, I guess, what we don't know yet. But so far, suffice to say, when it comes to, for example, the decision to all but end the war with Russia in
mm,
Ukraine, which has pretty much been made, as I'm sure you are aware yesterday, when the new Secretary of Defense basically said it's not America's responsibility to sort out European security, and that a return to the pre-2014 Ukrainian border with Russia is unrealistic. That is the closest you are going to get to total and unconditional capitulation. That was you know quite significant. And then even more significantly than that, this deliberate and sustained push to go after the organs of the American establishment that have for decades functioned as the de facto, arms, legs, ears, and eyes of the global, U.S. empire. So institutions like the National Endowment for Democracy, USAID, you know, which have always functioned as basically extensions of the US intelligence community, but extensions that were basically unaccountable. Because in the case of NED, National Endowment for Democracy, because it technically it was supposed to be some sort of non-governmental organization, even though it was created by a government. So it wasn't really subject to governmental oversight in the way that a typical government body is,
mm,
even more so for USAID. which, as I'm sure you know, is not subject to US congressional oversight. And unlike the CIA, it doesn't need presidential permission to do whatever it wants to do. So it was basically a law unto itself for the longest time. So how it used to work was that the US intelligence community was basically a government within a government. And whoever was president in Washington, D.C., learned to just stay away from them and let them do their own thing. So regardless of whichever talk is going on in the White House, like under Obama, there was a lot of talk and there was a lot of hope and whatnot. But what was really happening in the intelligence community and around the world was diametrically opposed to the flowery words coming out of his mouth. That's how it has been historically. But for the first time, we're seeing a US president and a US administration actively and directly going at the heart of that infrastructure that sort of functions as a state within a state for the purpose of completely defanging it and rendering it impotent. From a Nigerian point of view specifically, it's a wonderful thing because what it means is that we, not just Nigeria, but many African countries which historically have been subject to whatever leadership has been imposed on them by this very intelligence infrastructure that the US boasts. I think there's like a 4-year window now that we have to throw those shackles off. What we don't know is whether these things are going to be permanent. First of all, we don't know. Again, as I said, what the trade-off is going to be. Because the thing with people like Donald Trump is that nothing goes for nothing. So eventually we will find out what that trade-off is. There is always a trade-off. Secondly, we also don't know if after the Trump administration, which ends in obviously 2029, we don't know if the next administration is going to sustain, this policy direction. So the most we can say is that there's a 4-year window that we have now to assert some form of sovereignty. I'm especially very interested in seeing what our brothers in the Sahel do with this 4-year window because this is all they've ever needed and asked for, just a break, right? They've never had a break before because there's always been this huge oppressive weight of France just waiting to fall on them at any moment. I think this is the first time in their post-independence history where realistically they're looking to have the better part of a decade without active you know without actively being at risk of civilizational decimation at the hands of France or its big brother in the
US.
US. So I'm very excited actually to see what is going to come out of all of this. These are unprecedented times, and yeah, you know how they say there are entire decades that pass without anything happening, and then there are weeks where entire decades happen. Well, it's just been 3 weeks since Donald Trump took office, and it already feels like it's been a decade. So definitely looking forward to more of that.
Interesting. Let's still talk about USAID. There was something I read was a tweet from you about some MI6 guys recruiting journalists to speak ill about their country, and all that. What was that all about?
All right, so it's basically it's an MI6 front organization. It's
Mm,
supposedly an NGO,
mhm.
founded by two former in quotes. You're never really a former spy. You're always, once you're
Once a
in, you're always
spy,
in.
yeah.
Yeah. So two former MI6 operatives, Ross Burley and Adam Rutland, they founded this supposed NGO called the Center for Information Resilience. These operations always have these very Orwellian type of names, information resilience, right? So um, one of the in fact pretty much everyone at this NGO is linked to British and US intelligence. So one of the advisory board members, a lady called Cindy Otis, she's a former CIA analyst, very well known. She's actually written a book. Another lady is a lady called Nina Jankowicz,
Mm,
who is also linked to US intelligence. And basically, this NGO, quote unquote, um, has taken upon itself the job of monitoring Nigeria's information space to quote unquote uh, uh, to protect against what it calls FIMI. So FIMI is an acronym that means Foreign Intelligence manipulation and interference. Sorry, foreign information manipulation and interference, right? So basically, they have taken it upon themselves to protect Nigeria and the soft-brained people of Nigeria from foreign information manipulation and interference from the hands of the big bad Uncle Vlad in Moscow, right? So um, in all of this, it somehow never really occurred to these people that even the act of involving yourself as a foreign intelligence or intelligence linked body in Nigeria's information space in that way is in and of itself foreign intelligence, foreign information manipulation interference. But apparently they don't think of themselves that way. Apparently that's only something that the Russians supposedly do. So they apparently every quarter put together a very detailed report, which basically is the nuts and bolts of how to maintain informational control over a country, right? So the report for Q3 2024 was the one that was leaked to me, which is what I put out there. This is a report which, I mean, I don't know if you've gone through the 41 pages of this report. There's no way you read this report and you don't immediately understand that the entire purpose of this report is to interfere in a foreign country, right? This report has very detailed breakdown of the political information space in Nigeria, who the players are, what their positions are, what this organization considers to be Russian influenced positions, how to counteract them, who are the threats, and how those threats are to be neutralized. And then part of the strategy for apparently neutralizing these threats was to bring in a group of Nigerian journalists who obviously come from the NGO journalism sector, because in Nigeria there's a whole genre of journalism which is built on grant funding. So obviously it's entirely shaped by the people who are providing the funds, who are coincidentally the same people who are running organizations like this. So they call themselves disinformation researchers, fact-checking experts, cybersecurity. They give themselves all these titles, which basically didn't exist 3 or 4 years ago in the Nigerian journalism space. But because there's been a lot of grant money coming in, for you to access this grant money, you need to be able to put that title on your Twitter bio or your LinkedIn bio. So you go for some 3-week training program somewhere, somebody puts a bunch of ideas into your head and convinces you that you are now some sort of an expert, and that is that. So they found 10 of those people, their names are already out there. Flew them out to Accra, wine and dined them at the finest hotel in Accra. It's called the Kempinski Hotel. It's a 5-star hotel in Accra that starts from, I believe, $360 a night for the cheapest room. Um, and put them there for a week, and then dispatch them back to Nigeria with instructions, basically, that every quarter each of you is to produce a story that attacks one of the threats, supposed threats mentioned in this report, right? And I'm sure it won't surprise you to know that I was listed as a threat in that report. In fact, my name was mentioned 51 separate times in that report. I was apparently, or I am apparently, such a threat as far as the UK intelligence community is concerned, that I was considered to be an even bigger anti-establishment voice than Peter Obi, the opposition leader. And all along here, I was thinking I'm just some guy with a Twitter handle. So the more you know. So, but this was leaked to me anyway. So I decided, you know what, sunlight is the best disinfectant, as always. People need to know, right? Because Nigeria is, whether anybody likes it or not, Nigeria is a sovereign independent country. You cannot have a foreign intelligence agency deciding for Nigerians what is or is not acceptable in their information space, and what should or should not be platformed in their information space, who should and should not be attacked, who should and should not carry out this, this hit job and whatnot. That is the definition of foreign political interference, right? You have this supposed NGO founded by British intelligence, and not just founded, by the way. It even says there's public disclosure that it's actively funded by the UK Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. It's funded by the FCDO. which, by the way, is the same body that the MI6 also reports to. So it's basically funded by by the intelligence community in the UK, and it's funded by USAID as well. Right. So this is US and UK information warfare being waged in Nigeria through the medium of, dumbasses
NGO.
who think who call themselves journalists, right?
Mm,
Who do don't know any better because they think that anytime you see a white man with money in his hand, your job is to say, "Oh yeah, give me money, give me money, give me money, give me money," and never to ask why.
mm,
So after 500 years of interactions between Africa and Europe, a lot of our brothers still haven't figured out that you are supposed to beware of white men with gifts. They still haven't figured that out up till now. So once somebody comes to Abuja with a grant, that's it. You don't ask any questions, and you definitely never say no. Your job, once asked to jump, is to say how high. And that's the situation that we're dealing with in the Nigerian journalism space.
Wow. So from what you're saying now, a lot of our journalists and NGOs in Nigeria are sponsored by all these groups.
It's more than just a lot. I wouldn't go as far as to say the majority, but
Okay.
let's just say that within the Nigerian civil society space,
Society. Wow.
if it's not basically if the Nigerian civil society institution or organization, be it a media organization or advocacy, whatever, if it's
Mm,
not US funded, then maybe it's not very active because American
mm,
funding is what keeps the entire charade going. So even the ones that have funding from like the EU or the UK or
mm,
Japan or individual countries within the G7 or NATO or whatever, all that funding still has counterpart funding from the US. The money ultimately always comes from the US, right?
mm,
Including those who say, "Oh, we're not funded by USAID, but we're funded by some MacArthur or some Ford Foundation or some
mm,
Open Society Foundation." It's all the same thing because all these organizations are all linked to US secret intelligence, all of them without exception. They either work with them, some have even gone as far as to suggest that these are front organizations. So, for example, on Media Network, it's been suggested very strongly that Media Network is basically a huge CIA front, right? So these are all the funding institutions that keep the Nigerian civil society space active. And, the so-called journalism space in Abuja is entirely saturated with this money. So there was a time when I would have told you that it's better to have sort of non-profit funding than to be beholden to government and private interest. That non-profit funding is what help you to be objective and neutral and whatnot. Knowing what I've come to know over the past few years, however, that non-profit funding is not it doesn't just fall out of the sky. It's not
mm,
something that happens without some sort of context to it. And there's definitely a political and economic agenda behind the source of those funds, right? Because if all your funding for journalism in or what purports to be journalism in a country is coming from another country, and that means that the information that people are consuming in this country is being determined by the foreign policy of that country, which is a very dangerous situation, which means that
mm,
the people in this country don't even have any concept of what their own national interest is or what sovereignty means, because their information space is basically colonized. And that's the situation that we're dealing with. And unfortunately, even the journalists themselves, you would think that a journalist's first instinct or first job is to ask questions, right? Because that's what I would do. If some shadowy NGO shows up out of the blue and tells me they're going to fly me out to an African city that I like, put me up in a five-star hotel and whatnot. And at the end of all of that, they're telling me I have to sign a non-disclosure agreement. They don't want their name appearing anywhere. They want me to write something, but they don't want to be identified as the commissioning entity writing it, which is what happened in this case. Because apparently some people asked, okay, we're willing to write this thing, but can we just put a note at the bottom that this project is
mm,
supported by Center for Information Resilience? And the people
mm,
said, no, we don't want to be named. right? So I would think that as a journalist, seeing all these red flags one by one, you would put two and two together and realize you've walked into a foreign intelligence operation. This is obvious. Even if you are so lazy, you didn't research the people who came to you because you are so fixated on the gifts they gave you. Once you've been through three or four of these steps, you should have figured out that there's something very, very smelly going on here. And maybe I really don't want to associate myself with this. But unfortunately, I was having a conversation actually with a journalist who is not one of this group, but apparently is friends with some of them. So he's like telling me like the things that they're saying after the exposure. And basically, they're annoyed with me because, as far as they're concerned, look, this is a normal thing. People collect gigs all the time. We are just collecting. We are just trying to survive. Why are you pouring sand into our gary? And why are you doing as if now you holy pass? You understand? So what
Mm,
if they are foreign intelligence? So what? We're just trying to eat. That's genuinely how these people see it. In
mm,
fact, some of them, even after the exposure, where the organization itself is trying to distance itself from what has become a PR disaster, some of them are like, we want to go ahead, we want to do the story because of the £1,000 that the organization is supposed to pay them. That's the only thing they can see.
mm. Interesting. But I mean, I've read, I'm sure you agree with me, especially people in the US government, like the MI6 group, they're also saying that you're working with Russian entities, you're a Russia mole,
Mm,
uh, all your agenda is pro-Russia, you are funded by
mm.
Russia, you're KGB, FSB, blah, 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 blah. So what do you have to say about that?
I mean, it's very interesting that maybe 2 or 3 years ago,
Hmm.
when there was no major Western news or media establishment that I you wouldn't have seen me on.
Hmm.
I've been on CNN, I've been on BBC, I still appear on BBC from time to time. Fox, Jeune Afrique, which is the
Hmm.
French company behind the Africa Report,
Hmm.
um, the New Yorker magazine. I've been featured in a Netflix documentary, like any kind of major Western media platform you can think of. I'm there, or I have been there. And it's funny because through the course of all of this, no one ever accused me of being a Western spy or being Western sponsored or anything like that. All of this nonsense started the minute I made an appearance on a Russian TV station. I appeared on RT and I
Hmm.
criticized something that was happening at the behest of the US government. And the reason I appeared on RT was because that was the only platform where I could deliver the criticism that needed to be delivered. I think people often forget, especially in the African context, people often forget that we are not Westerners.
Hmm.
We're not. We're not, Easterners either. We're not Russian or Chinese. We're Africans. We're non-aligned. We have every right, morally and constitutionally, to associate ourselves with anybody that we want to. So even if, for the sake of argument, you were going to say that, oh, David has become a Russian, agent, or he's accepting money from the Russians or whatnot. How exactly would that be different from these Nigerian journalists that are collecting money from American and British foreign intelligence bodies and who think that it's a normal thing because they're just trying to eat?
Hmm.
I'm not even doing that. I'm not collecting money from any Russia. Like if you appear on RT, you're appearing because you want to talk. Nobody's paying you one kobo.
No.
The
Hmm.
Russians don't even have money like that. Nobody's paying you a kobo to, again, this idea that um the world's biggest propagandists, who are the ones who spend all of the money astroturfing the entire planet's media. I'm sure you've seen the reports. The USAID was funding something like, was it 6,000 journalists
I thought
in
that.
30 countries?
Yes, even
The
more.
people who actually spend billions of
Mm,
dollars every year astroturfing the entire planet's media. We now say, hey, it's Russia, one country with an economy that is basically, a couple of states in the US, pretty much. Like the Russian economy is basically California. I
mm.
might even be overstating it by saying it's California. It's basically California, right?
No, California is
Yeah,
bigger than Russia economically.
yeah. So you would then say it's that country that
Mm,
somehow has this huge wherewithal to carry out this huge grand global propaganda uh expenditure where they're going around there, David Hundeyin. Like, come on, please, let's be serious, right? if if I have an ideological disagreement with something Western, I'm allowed to say it. So yeah, as I was saying, people need to get real, right? I'm a Nigerian, I'm an African. I have every right to appear on RT and Sputnik, just the same way I have every right to appear on BBC and CNN and Fox. I've appeared on all of them, and the sky didn't fall down, right? So I think Africans in particular, because I don't really care what Oyinbo people have to say, or like, oh, this because Oyinbo people are notorious for thinking that Africans don't exist. So the whole world is divided into, you know, American aligned and Russian
East or
aligned.
West, yeah.
Yeah, Oyinbos are notorious for doing that. So I'm not, I don't really care about what they have to say. That's their own, you know, culture. But it's Africans who repeat these things that I'm more concerned about, because I feel like a lot of us genuinely don't realize that we are not Westerners and that we will never be Westerners.
Mm.
So no matter how much cultural influence you have from the West, no matter how many of your family members are immigrants living in the West, no matter how much Western media you consume, no matter how much Western technology you use in your everyday life, no matter how much English you speak, because English is a Western language, no matter how Western influenced your life and your lifestyle is, you are not a Westerner. You are an African. You're from the global South, right? That means that your way of conceiving the world and the geopolitical makeup of the world cannot be the same as a white guy in
Oh,
Wisconsin or
that's
in
true.
Birmingham. You are not
Mm-hmm.
the same.
Mm-hmm.
So when people, it's one thing when to see it in reports written by MI6 backed supposed NGO. It's another thing to see Nigerians like me saying this thing. Oh, David is now working for the Kremlin or the KGB, and I'm like, what an incredibly foolish thing to say. You know, how
Yeah.
incredibly foolish, because saying that implies that somehow the default way of being or the ideal way of being is to be Western aligned. And the minute you're no longer Western aligned,
Mm.
then something is wrong. If the minute you're not Western aligned, it means that some big bad person from Russia has come and
Like
has used money.
you cannot just be
Yeah,
opinionated, you know. I
yeah,
mean,
which
I
is
can relate to what you're saying because I publish a newspaper online. I have this Atlanta discourse, and I'm not sponsored by anybody. I'm strictly opinionated. If I have a view that is anti anybody, I'll say it, you know, and that's just the way it is. So I can relate with it that you don't have to be left or right. Your opinion is your opinion. That's why here we do no holds barred. No problem. I mean, it is what it is. So let me take you to Naido. Well, somebody said sometime because I'm a member of Naido too, so that's what I'm asking. And people were asking me and all that. So, but I understood what you were saying, but I just wanted you to say it again so that for people that will probably listen to this. You said Naido is a creation. I don't know if that's how you said it, but it's a creation of Nigeria NIA or something like that. Let me allow you to use your own words. You know what I'm talking about. So, what exactly were you trying to say about Naido and the Nigerian intelligence agency?
so you literally just need to go to NIDO's own website.
Mm,
So there's more than one website. I think there's NIDO Europe and NIDO
mm,
USA.
yeah.
You just literally need to go to either of those
There's
websites. You
Nido
need to,
in every continent.
yeah.
Yeah.
So just need to go to the About Us section
Mm,
of these websites. It says in its own words, right? I'm not the one that came up with that information. It says in its
mm.
own words, it was an initiative of the Olusegun Obasanjo administration.
So,
So that is what NIDO is.
mm,
Now, for whatever reason, um, the I guess the fact that it has its roots in Nigerian foreign policy and Nigerian intelligence maybe is not really appealing to a newer generation of Nigerian diaspora. So maybe
mm,
it's not in the organization's interests
mm,
for for this to be publicized as much. But the facts are facts. The fact that maybe it's not expedient for this thing to be public knowledge now doesn't mean it's not true, and doesn't mean that this, if someone carries out the slightest bit of research, they're not going to find this information. It's out there. It's on your
mm,
website. It's called carried in the news. You know, how can you say that it's an independent organization and there is a government uh budget for it every year? There's literally there are line items in the Nigerian foreign missions around the world. There are line items in their annual budgets for the NIDO chapters in those countries. So how can you say it's independent? It has no input from the government. It was created by the government, and the government funds it. It's like telling me that this Center for Information Resilience has nothing to do with the UK because it's an NGO. It's not a government thing. Meanwhile, it's funded by the government, and the people who founded it are all intelligence people. Are you serious? So again, I wasn't even saying it's a bad thing. To be honest, I think the Nigerian intelligence agency or the Nigerian intelligence community wouldn't be doing their job if they
Mm,
didn't have such an organization and if
mm,
they weren't monitoring what is happening in the organization. It's the bread and butter of foreign intelligence.
mm,
Like if you are a country like Nigeria that has a very large diaspora, a diaspora that has the potential to be very consequential at home. So consequential, for example, that the current president of Nigeria was once a diaspora
good.
for many years, right? That's how influential the diaspora is. Diaspora wields political influence and economic influence back home. So if you're a country that has that kind of large and powerful diaspora, at the very least, you want to know what is happening in that diaspora. Otherwise, somebody can plot a coup from the diaspora and you won't even know, right?
Mm,
It's your job to know. So I don't even think it's a bad thing. I think you're just doing your job. You wouldn't
mm.
be doing your job if you didn't have a NIDO
Have
or if
any
you didn't
input?
have,
That's true. Mhm.
any input into it. So I'm not sure why there was so much controversy
Yeah, yeah.
over it when I said
I
so.
think the problem was members. You know, we have just people that are members. You know,
Mm,
NIGHTCOM is what Abike is in charge of, the Nigeria
mm,
Diaspora Commission. You know, that's the
mm,
body that gets the funding. You know, but
mm,
ordinary members pay their dues. They organize events independently. You understand? And the NIGHTCOM, which Abike supervises, has refused till date to constitute the board because it's enshrined in the statute or the laws governing NIDO that there should be a board that will encompass diaspora from all the continents of the world, which the NIDCOM has refused to do. So their grounds is that, oh, we are from members, we organize this, we are paying our dues and all that. We don't even get government patronage. Now, the second thing is that NIDO itself is balkanized. They have one, two, three factions in some continent. So there are groups that are pro-government, that those are anti-government. Of course, there are people in the middle, you know, who are neither nor that, that just want a good Nigeria. But like you rightly said, it would be sheer stupidity on the part of NIA not to even poke nose into what Nigerians in diaspora are doing anyway. So anyway, let's leave that. Let's come to West Africa. We've discussed ECOWAS so much in the past, you know, the Niger scenario, especially the coup, the attack, you know, and so most of everything you have said that we have discussed together has come to pass. Now, EAS as breaking out of ECOWAS fully. And recently you said there's a rift with the coastal versus Sahelian geopolitical schism in West Africa. That's the way you put it, that if not well curtailed, it could blow into something else. What exactly were you trying to say in that regard?
Well, basically, we've seen situations where civilizations or countries that used to be one contiguous entity, due to um, geopolitical interference from outside,
Mhm,
have been turned into East this and West that, or North this and South
mhm.
that. So Korea, for example, the only reason there is a country called North Korea and a separate country called South Korea
Oh, yeah,
is
true.
because of outside interference. It was
Mhm,
one nation, it was one entity. East Germany and West Germany used to exist for the same reason. And then, before the fall of the Soviet Union, and then they just became Germany, right? The fact that these things have happened shows that it is possible that West Africa, which we think of as this, we really don't think that, it's possible for there to be real conflict or real, ideological disagreement
mhm,
within a place like West Africa, because we think that we're all the same.
mhm,
All these countries are kind of, even whether it's Sahelians or the coastal ones, we're very similar cultures. We eat the same
mhm,
food.
mhm.
We intermarry a lot. We're all not very, we're quite poor generally speaking. So, we just have bigger problems. So the idea that there's going to be a schism between us. It's not one that we take serious. But this has happened before, right? And the example of North Korea versus South Korea is the one that sticks the most, or the idea, or the example of what used to be North Vietnam and South Vietnam. These things happen where outside political and military interference makes it such that what starts off as something you're not taking serious over time, especially when money gets involved. So if you see now, the three AES countries, they have this huge infrastructure plan now to connect the three countries. They basically turn them into one super economy in the Sahel. And you may or may not be aware of this as well, but the big economic problem they have, which is lack of access to the sea,
To see, yeah.
they found a de facto way to solve it, which many people don't realize. And that de facto solution is called Togo,
I
right?
know about
A
that.
lot of their cargoes are coming in and out of Togo. Because Togo is a very tiny country, tiny economy. So they need the business, right? They are very happy to, because what other economic alternative do they have? You've even seen the Togolese, I believe there was the foreign minister making a case for potentially joining the AES.
Even the
That could happen.
president, even the
Yeah,
president.
that could happen. And
Mm-hmm.
once that happens, in my opinion, once that happens, not only have they solved their own basic economic problem within that within that tranche of West Africa, but they would have effectively divided West Africa, right? Because for now they're saying, well, if you have an ECOWAS passport, you are still free to come in and go out. For now, there isn't any, they're not making any posturing that makes it look like they're trying to lock out anyone else in West Africa. For now, they're being conciliatory. That could change. And history shows that eventually, especially if the economies start to accelerate, if they start becoming better off, and then other people want to start moving there, all of a sudden, all these barriers will start going up. And then what used to be this contiguous West African civilization that we all know, all of a sudden would have become divided. This can happen. And as someone who spent, I mean, I've spent a lot of my life, especially my childhood, road tripping around West Africa. I know, I think I've done, of the 15 West African countries, I think I've gone round about 9 by road. So like this is my neighborhood. Like I know this place at the back of my hand. And apart from the fact that it would be an economically ruinous thing, it will also be a very, I think, from a selfish or from an emotional point of view, I think it would be a very regrettable thing for that to happen. Because I mean, I can't think of any region anywhere in the world right now which is trying to divide, which is actively trying to divide itself. Everybody's rather trying to consolidate according to the similarities that they share, because the world is heading towards some sort of conflict. So everybody's consolidating that we have our little block here, we have and it's just only in Africa that things like this are happening. So my main concern is that eventually there will come a time when, because of alignment with people who are not even Africans, so whether those people are French, whether those people are Russian, whoever they are, or American or British, because of alignments with non-Africans, then you have countries in Africa that will start having actual shooting wars with each other. That thankfully hasn't happened yet, but if it were to happen, I think, on a continent that already has such a tragic history, I think that would probably be the most tragic thing
Yeah,
of
it will be
all.
a catastrophe. No
You know,
problem. We're pressed for time, so let me rush my next two questions. I mean, according to that map, if you break it at Togo, that leaves Nigeria and Benin Republic isolated. So
isolated
that's not
completely.
good. And it does look also that it will be difficult for the rest to align with the EAS. I don't think they have a problem.
It
Try
actually won't
Guinea.
be.
They want a Guinea,
Ghana,
Senegal, yeah, Ghana. And looks like everybody is just fed up in Nigeria. You're not afraid the leadership. So, I'm Bene, I'm sure when they see where their Francophone brothers are going, we join the bandwagon and, well,
Benin, Benin cannot be trusted for anything. They're the
and
most
it's,
opportunistic foreign policy you've ever seen. So
yeah. All right, no problem. So let's go to Nigeria. I know there's this Freedom of Information Act, you and your good friend, I've forgotten his name, we're working on. the report came out in trickles, heavily redacted and all that. Now we have Trump in the White House, Donald J. Trump. Now, do you think that there's going to be do you think there'll be anything that will change vis-a-vis the FOIA and America's handling of the Bola Tinubu's presidency? What, if you understand what I'm trying to say, is it a good thing for Bola Tinubu that Trump is there and that kind of thing?
So if this were still an FOIA case, if it were still in the hands of these executive bodies, then you would say, yeah, the president should be worried. However, that's not the case. It's gone to courts now. It's in federal courts and it's awaiting summary judgment. So it's actually not in the hands of Trump or his cabinet at all. It's actually in the hands of a federal judge. So, and for reference, this is a lifelong card-carrying Democrat who was appointed by Obama. Her name is Beryl Howell. So the truth is, I don't have a lot of optimism about a proper summary judgment being delivered, that these things should be unredacted. I don't believe she's going to do that based on her antecedents in this case. She was the one who gave a preliminary ruling that the president's lawyer, this was in 2023, that the president's lawyer should be allowed to intervene in the case because his privacy concerns are not being adequately taken care of. This, by the way, was after he was already sworn in as president. And you have a judge talking about privacy concerns for a public official in charge of 200 million people. So I can already see, I don't want to put you in trouble by, saying what I really want to say on the show, but I don't, to be honest, I have no faith in her impartiality at all. I think she has picked a side. I think she's on the side of the people who appointed her. She's fully, fully on their side. So I don't think, and then there's also the added dimension that in the US now, um, judges like her, especially Democrats, have this idea that they are sort of like the last bastion protecting the country against the craziness of Donald Trump. So there's this whole phenomenon of judicial activism in the US now. So she very much strikes me as one of those who will play up to that, who, because anything at all that will be seen as aiding the agenda of, Donald Trump and Elon Musk, they probably don't want to go near it. So she, if my prediction is correct, she's probably going to just pop it off and just play it around. This time next year we'll come back and we'll still be saying we don't know what's happening because she has not given a judgment.
Okay, so under a Trump presidency, what do you expect for Bola Tinubu? Is he going to still have that fantastic relationship with the White House?
Oh no, he definitely doesn't. I mean, he already doesn't. You can tell he was one of the very few presidents on the earth who didn't congratulate Trump publicly after he was sworn in. Very loud silence. So, because obviously we know who put him in office, and it definitely wasn't Trump's people. So that much is very clear. The chain of communication has definitely been broken. Trump's people are definitely not on the same page with him. And I don't think there's anything that he has to offer Trump's people that would be sufficient for them to cut a deal with him, because I think whatever the Americans want from Nigeria, they're already getting. I don't think there's anything extra Nigeria has to offer that would convince Donald Trump to make some kind of a deal with him. So what I expect his strategy will be, which I guess we're already seeing signs of it, is look for other alignments. So for example, the whole thing with France, I suspect that's what that is. He needs strong geopolitical partners. The US is no longer that partner, so it's pretty much the UK, France, and that's pretty much it. Personally, I don't think those are going to be sufficient because I think the US is the real power. But again, ultimately, it's still up to the Nigerian people to decide where they want to go. So wait and see.
All right. So my last question is about the opposition. 2027 is coming, another election, and it does look like there'll be some realignment of forces. El-Rufai, Atiku, Atiku went to visit Obasanjo recently. So what do you think? Do you foresee Atiku working with Obi? Do you think there will be formidable opposition in 2027? We all know INEC is a major hurdle to free and fair election. So what does the future say from your side of the prison?
I really wish I had an answer to that question because of over the past over the past 4 to 6 months, I've made a
Mm,
deliberate decision
mm,
to make
mhm,
myself inaccessible
mm.
to the entire political spectrum
Of
in Nigeria.
Nigeria. I know, I
I've
know,
made
I
myself
know.
very inaccessible. So
Mhm,
previously, it used to be possible for these guys to pick
mhm,
up the phone and
mhm,
talk to me. Or,
mm,
previously I could tell you, oh, this was happening right now. Over
mhm,
the past half a year, I've made a deliberate choice
mm,
to make myself scarce, to make myself inaccessible. So whatever the articles or the OBs or the El-Rufais are planning, to be honest, I couldn't really tell you because I've made myself inaccessible. And the
yeah.
reason I made myself inaccessible is that I took a look at, like, I zoomed out, I took a step back, and I thought, you know what? Even if you're for the sake of argument, you're able to take Tinubu out of power in
Mm,
2027, and then he ends up being President Nasir El-Rufai
mm.
at some point in the future, who has benefited? What's the point? You might as well just leave Tinubu there, as far as I'm concerned.
Mhm,
You know, so I don't I don't believe in change just for the sake of it, just for the sake
mm,
of change, right? If there's going to be change, it has to be change that is trending in a positive direction. So if you are realigning so that we can end up with one, you know, with another Buhari who is maybe not going to be as ruinous as Tinubu, but is still, very negative, and he just acts a bit more presidential, but still
mm,
has no idea what he's doing.
mm,
What's the point? I have actually reached a point in my political consciousness, if you like, where I actually think that it's not an election that is going to save Nigeria. Because
mm,
if even if a good president comes in, Nigeria is always constantly 4 years away from disaster. I don't think that's a
mm,
recipe for development.
mm,
So I actually don't think that it's one election with one fantastic result that is going to change things. I think Nigerians themselves need to. This word is very rinsed and overused, but I'm going to use it
mm,
again, and that word is revolution. I think Nigerians need to decide that our our lives matter, right? Our lives have value. So we can't just constantly be doing this forever and ever.
mm.
This isn't acceptable.
Yeah, going
We need
around
to
in
find a new
circles.
way.
Yeah. Mhm,
Yeah. So right now, I look at those political players. I don't see anybody who has revolutionary potential among them.
mm,
I see people who have, like Peter Obi, obviously has some revolutionary ideas, but I don't see revolutionary potential in
mm,
him because he's not the guy who who is going to lead a movement of the masses in Nigeria. At the end of the day,
mm,
he's a billionaire, right? He
mm,
might have good intentions, but there's a limit to how far he's prepared to go to
mm,
actualize those good intentions. So I don't like, after the 2023 election, for example, and I've said this elsewhere, I didn't think that somebody who, I think the blind could see and the deaf could hear it, that he actually won that election. I didn't think that the opportune thing to do was just sit
let it
there and
go.
take it, and then be talking about reclaiming your mandate in court and not
Mm,
in the Nigerian courts. Like, really?
mm.
I personally didn't think that's what should have happened. I think if the current president was the one in that situation
Mm.
where he actually won an election and somebody took it away from him, the country would have burned.
I told her, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Tinubu will go. I mean,
So yeah, the country would have burned, but this guy really, he doesn't have it in him like that. Which is, again, I'm not criticizing him in terms of his ideas or his
mm,
intentions, but it's just what Nigeria needs, and what West Africa needs from Nigeria right now is much more than just at least we tried, right?
mm,
I'm tired of trying. I'm tired of at least I tried. I'm tired of my conscience is clear. I'm tired of we go again in 4 years. I don't want
mm.
that, right? I turned 35 this year,
Oh,
and I
wow.
was thinking to myself the other day that, you know, 15 years ago I was how old? I was 20. And like
Mm,
it's felt like I had a whole century of life ahead of me.
mm,
And now I'm thinking about it, at 15 years time, I'm gonna be 50. And at that
mm,
point, you're looking at retirement. Life is already, in many ways, is already over.
Let
So
me ask you this before we go. Do you think you'll run for public office in future? Do you think there's a chance that you will run for public office, at least in Nigeria?
well, I'm not the one in charge of the variables that would lead to that.
Oh,
But
okay.
if the stars aligned,
Mm,
if, for example, like my security situation was such that it were possible,
mm,
then it's definitely possible. It's definitely possible. I mean, I have to accept. There's no denying it. I have to accept that the work that I do has transcended just journalism and it has become politically potent. I have to
mm,
accept that it's a
mm,
material reality.
mhm.
So, um, by the way, public office doesn't mean president. Public
I
office
know.
could be, you could be an
And
auditor in a local government council.
a
That's
counselor.
also public office.
Okay,
So
governor. Yeah. All right.
yeah,
Thank you so much, David Hundeyin. Thank you for your time always. I know you run a very tight schedule. God bless you. Godspeed always. So to our viewers everywhere, David has said it. No holds barred. Jugular always. And as far as Nigeria is concerned, the onus is on the people. So as far as the world is concerned, everybody just has to adjust. There's nothing wrong in being opinionated. Not everybody is left, right, east, or west. You could just be at the center and say what you want to say when you want to. So once again, David, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. And we always look forward to having you when you have the time. Bye. Yeah.
thank you for having me.
All right.